Ladies and gentlemen, I can now open the floor to questions.
Jó napot, én Kriszbai Diana vagyok a Magyar Táviratirodáttól, és első
I'm representing the Hungarian News Agency, and my first question goes to the Deputy Secretary General and the General as well. We said that NATO has to respond to new type of security challenges, but whether or not a larger structural organizational change that would also affect the organization in general, is that also part of this? How would you like to respond to those limitations that are how would you like to respond to cyber challenges which know no limitations, neither geographically or otherwise? So how is that going to be made possible?
You raise a very important issue about the fundamentally new challenges that are facing us, such as the cyber challenges, the challenge of cyber warfare. And already each of our countries faces these kinds of cyber challenges to our national networks, to our ability to communicate both internally and with the outside world. So this is a very important new security challenge. NATO is responding in various ways. I would say very importantly, last summer at the Warsaw Summit, cyber was created as an operational domain for the NATO alliance. That means that there is attention at all levels, from the military through the political side of the House, to how we think about cyber in every aspect of military operations. And that work is ongoing at the present time, and I think is extraordinarily important because it has focused the entire alliance on this challenge. But NATO, thanks to, frankly, some of our members being especially focused on this, has been working these issues for a long time. Estonia, for example, faced significant cyber attacks back in 2007, and since that time has been a leading NATO ally in driving these issues forward. And Estonia has been contributing in conceptual ways, I would say most importantly through the founding of a Center of Excellence on Cyber Policy in Tallinn that has helped NATO to be thinking about many of these cyber issues from a kind of normative perspective. How do we incorporate cyber into the rule of law? And I think that too is an important priority that NATO has set, and it helps this discourse and debate worldwide because many nations and many different organizations, the UN among them, are grappling with these kinds of rule of law issues as well. So NATO is making a contribution also in this area.
Hozzátehetek-e még egy gondolatot?
I wonder if I can just add an idea. I couldn't agree more with the Secretary General, with what the Deputy Secretary General said. Actually, we have entered a new era, a new epoch, which is pointing into the direction of technological revolution, and we see that very rapid changes are happening. And humanity as such has an enormous capacity and knowledge to develop new devices and new equipment. So the innovative knowledge is very, very huge, especially in the world of cyber and the world of ICT. But we also see that these types of developments, on the one hand, improve the quality of our life, but at the same time there are always malicious use. There's also an opportunity for malicious use. There are also unstable states, failing states, who are using these technological devices. They also obtain the knowledge, the necessary know-how, and they use this to achieve their goals and objectives. And this is why, as General Mercier mentioned yesterday, our world today is such that it's very difficult to determine whether it is peace, we're at peace, or we're at war. Whether it's peacetime or wartime, there's a blurred boundary between qualified areas, that is war and peace. So you can wage war in space anytime, and you cannot always identify the opponents or the enemies. And since we've just mentioned the horrible terror act in London yesterday, we can also see that those who committed the terror act in Paris were terrorists, and they used the cyberspace, internet, they used gaming software to organize their activities and their blow. So we have to be in possession of the means and tools that enable us to ensure collective defense in this domain as well, to guarantee the safety of our people and our nations, and this is why we need such development. Last year we launched in the military national security service, we set up a cybersecurity center, because this is very important for the future, very important to provide effective answers and responses in this field as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Király István Daniel from Inforadio. I would like to ask Mr. Simicskó about the Hungarian defense spending, and if you don't mind, I will ask in Hungarian. Miniszter úr azt mondta, hogy ha a helyzet indokolja 2024-re...
If a situation brings it forth, then we can bring forward the 2% GDP defense spending from 2026 to 2024. What would be the situation that you would speed up this type of increased spending? When could be a decision in this respect? And are there any plans how to use these additional funds, how to spend them? Thank you very much. This is a very important question, a very essential one. We are NATO members, and we really appreciate that. We think that NATO is the token of our security. And therefore, meetings like these ones, seminars like these ones, thinking together along the same lines are very important, and we also want to be shapers of the future. We also want to shape our common security. And of course, collective knowledge and collective wisdom is very important to make decisions. This is why we are right now in the process of creating a new national security strategy, a new military strategy as well, taking into account all the lines of thinking prevailing in NATO, all the strategies being present in the alliance. So we shape and we also adapt to what is around us. And we see the requirements, we see the demands around us, which are very important. These have been... We've been members of NATO since 1992. Probably it is now that these demands have come up the most characteristic and most bold manner. So these require very committed steps from the member states in order to increase security. This comprises the increase of defense spending. We've been working on that for a while, and we made a decision even earlier when there was no such an urge to increase the defense spending to reach 2% of GDP, 2%. We back then already developed a financial plan how we could go up to 2% of the GDP by 2026. We have a plan, we have a financial plan as well, that if this becomes even more pressing, collective wisdom and collective decision-making in NATO brings that about, because we expect a lot from the 25th, 26th of May NATO summit, as we think the new US president is also going to attend. So one of the plans is the 0.1% per annum development, 0.1% per annum increment, but we can speed that up, as I mentioned, if we increase the defense spending by 0.15% of the GDP per annum, then by 2024 we can be up to 2%. If we can go up to 0.23% as annual increment, then we can reach 2% as early as 2022. A big question is, as you asked, and you rightly asked that question, is not only spending more, but spending better. How to spend that? It's very important to determine that. And what I have to say is that we have a lot of things to spend money on, because we have a bad legacy or heritage. The capabilities and of the Hungarian Defense Forces are not the best in certain fields. We badly need upgrading in certain domains. I have to say that we're in the last hour, in the 23rd or the 24th hour, so there is a lot to do. There's a long way to go in terms of boosting our defense capability, like helicopter, rotary wing capability, airlift capability, cyber defense is something we would like to improve. Our land forces also require certain investment and development that would make the country stronger, the nation stronger, and of course NATO stronger as such. We would like to strengthen certain special operation forces capabilities, because we badly need special operation capabilities. There is a lot, therefore, to spend on. We would, however, like to do that in a transparent manner and a responsible manner. Thank you very much.
Haraszti Gyula vagyok a Magyar Időktől.
Gyula Haraszti from Magyar Idők. I have two questions.
Ugye említették itt a határvédelem
You mentioned the issue of border protection.
Magyarországot eléggé súlyosan érinti.
Unfortunately, Hungary was very much impacted by the migration wave, especially through the Balkan route, where masses of migrants try to enter the country. Is it perhaps possible that NATO, with stronger forces or through partnerships, provide help in border protection to this region, the European Union? And is it possible that this issue be raised during the negotiations held by the Hungarian Prime Minister and the Secretary General of NATO? And my second question relates to the issue of Russia. What is NATO's take on that currently? Because according to international news, there's a sort of peacemaking attitude on the horizon between the United States and Russia at the moment. To what intensity is the rotational military exercise being planned to be continued, opposing the Russian threat within the European Union? There shall be big military exercises held which serve the purpose of preparing for the Russian threats, but at the same time the United States is visibly concentrating on other directions and concentrating on other regions in the world.
Are those questions for me, I guess?
Jaj, bocsánat, és egyetlen plusz kérdés.
Oh yes,
hogy,
one extra
hogy,
question, sorry.
Trump nyilatkozott arról is.
Donald Trump Donald Trump also mentioned that anyone who does not achieve the 2% might not be protected. What is NATO's take on that?
Well, first of all, let me comment. That's not three short questions, but three long questions, I'll just say. So I'll try to be brief. But first of all, the United States is a founding member of the alliance, and we have, of course, heard loud and clear Mr. Trump's comments during his election campaign when he expressed very great concern that some of the allies weren't pulling their own weight. I think that's frankly been a valuable lesson for all of us inside the alliance. My boss, SecGen Stoltenberg, likes to say that it's important to have that very firm message coming from Washington. But he's also underscored, and I will underscore for you here today, the degree to which this commitment to 2% of GDP predated the Trump administration. It was really a commitment that all allies signed up to in 2014 at the Wales summit, in that watershed year when we saw both Russian assertiveness and seizure of Ukrainian territory in Crimea, number one, but also the rise of ISIS and their seizure of Mosul during that period. So 2014 was truly a watershed year for the alliance, and it was in 2014 that the allies all joined together in making this commitment. It was the very next year, 2015, that we saw the cuts stop, and we began to see a small rise in defense spending across the alliance for all allies, Hungary included, by the way. And it was also then in the next year, in 2015, that we see this increase that I talked about, 3.8% across the alliance, amounting to a $10 billion increase. So I think it's been welcome to have President Trump articulate this kind of message, but I think it's also clear that all of the allies joined together in agreeing to the commitment well before this election year in the United States. I'd also say that since President Trump has entered office, we've heard very strong commitments across the board. We had Secretary of Defense Mattis attending the Defense Ministerial right after the new year started, but the Vice President Pence, was there 2 days later, also voicing strong U.S. commitment to the alliance. And since that time, the President himself has spoken up very strongly. SecGen was just in Washington this week and again heard those strong commitments. So I feel that as an alliance as a whole, we are working this problem, and we will continue to work this problem very hard. Now, as to the migrant crisis, I wanted to comment on that because that has been a human tragedy across this region in Europe, as well as the Middle East into Afghanistan and also down into Africa. It's a human tragedy that has been exacerbated by trafficking and by criminal networks. And so our view in the alliance is that migrants deserve compassion. Certainly that is very important, and their cases must be considered on a timely basis according to correct procedures and laws that are in existence. But that said, I think it is also important to do everything we can in the NATO alliance to create conditions so that migrants do not feel like they have to take to the road. They do not feel like they have to become migrants and refugees, but in fact have the conditions of stability and security back home that will enable them to continue their lives in their home countries. That's why we've been working so hard on our projecting stability goals. But some of these kinds of tasks are not for NATO. And here I want to talk about our cooperation with the European Union. We always say that NATO and the European Union separately have different sets of tools that they work with, but when you bring them together, they have a total toolkit. And we do feel that the work the European Union does to create economic development in places in the world that have been under a lot of economic crisis, this is very, very important. The kind of work that NATO does, you can see in our efforts, for example, in the so-called Sea Guardian operation in the central Mediterranean. Again, that's working together with the European Union, but that is to help create conditions so that migrants and refugees are safe as they enter into these very, very dangerous circumstances. For example, trying to cross the Mediterranean in rickety boats in unsuitable craft of various kinds. And so we have been working together with the EU, with the various coast guards in the regions, and that's the kind of work, that's the kind of contribution that NATO is able to make in this area.
May I add something, because you had a question about exercises, and what we continue to do is to enforce our defense and deterrence posture. And when we are talking about deterrence, deterrence is always a factor of three parameters, which is our capacity, our resolve, and the messaging that goes with that. And in NATO, we are conducting 100 exercises per year, and we had 200 exercises that are linked to the NATO exercise and conducted by the nations. And some of the big exercises are aimed to demonstrate this capacity, resolve, and messaging. The next one will be Trident Ranger 18 next year, and it will be an Article 5 exercise in which we will engage a huge amount of soldiers, ships, aircraft working together. That will demonstrate the capacity of the alliance, that will demonstrate the resolve of the alliance, that will demonstrate through an appropriate messaging what we are able to do in order to continue to protect the security of our borders. And just to finish with that, when I'm talking about the capacity, the 2% is not a number that comes from nowhere. The 2% comes from the analysis of the political guidance that we have received in NATO, translated into military requirements. And this 2% is the minimum of defense expenditure that are necessary in order to fulfill all, in order to meet and to build all the capabilities that are necessary to fulfill the core task.
Hadd tegyek én is hozzá valamit.
So to add something.
A migrációs kérdéskörhöz.
In relation to the issue of migration, we have to ask ourselves one question. Is migration merely a human rights issue? This question has to be raised to Brussels, because previously we have already mentioned, and I think that is pretty clear, especially after seeing the tragedy of yesterday, that migration is an opportunity for terrorist organizations to step across borders and gain easy access to the European Union and therefore threaten and damage the security of our countries. While our soldiers are in the crisis regions with varying efficiency, yet we are still there, and at the same time our civilians are under such attacks. This will be a huge struggle in the future, and we are committed in this struggle. We have to do away with terrorism. We are present in all the crisis regions where terrorism stems from, and if we are not there at present, we shall be there. At the same time, the European Union is in a nonsense situation where it is very strong economically, yet at the same time it is incapable of protecting its external borders. We are constantly recommending that the European Union actually build up such a capacity because we have to guarantee the safety and security of our civilians. I think we have worded this opinion of ours many times in the past, even if we were facing criticism. The cooperation of NATO and the EU, it's a great question if it shall encompass this issue. The Mediterranean fleet is very much welcome, as referred to by Madam Deputy Secretary General, and I think we should take these steps further because this is indeed a source of danger. And when we're talking about terrorism in the cyberspace and new challenges, then I believe that we have to formulate the initiatives and capacities that provide an adequate answer and solution to these issues. Therefore, we are committed towards the intention of the new American cabinet when we have to undertake more in the fight against terrorism. And back to the previous question, I do believe that NATO clearly and swiftly responded to these challenges. The Baltic states have been helped. We Hungarians are participating in this aid provided to the Baltic states as well with an infantry unit, an infantry company. And we also participate and shall continue to participate in the airspace protection, airspace defense of the Baltic states. We are there together with our Polish comrades. NATO has taken these very important steps. These were clear-cut steps of deterrence. And at the same time, very correctly so, we emphasize the necessity of a dialogue and a dialogue and a dialogue with Russia. That's the only way forward. However, in managing the danger coming from the threat coming from the south, we do have room for development. The campaigns have started, and we shall be further committed in this work as well, because there is no room for this in the everyday life of humanity. We have to do away with such sources of danger. And just one thought in relation to budget. I would recommend that we call together or convene the finance ministers of NATO member states in order to make sure that we can take these further steps. We, on our behalf, are completely backing the initiative. Financial experts obviously have a different view on the budget of a given country. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the press conference this morning. Sirs, ma'am, thank you very much for your participation.